wanted to get everything else to be living around me and I know should go lectures on stuff and so the time card very far and say kid up that and then the parents kind of well she's had a superficially gave her a song of the film. So you kind of had a little bit of option with the song. So this is just some random stuff. Yes, this is a watch it because oh yeah, I know already. Yeah. So this is gonna be something. So that is this is a friend of mine. That would be 1927. That is my even that Donna Corral. Right. Oh, well, she made the same. She made the same films and Mr. That's also super tight. Yeah. He lives with watching her. But he's been. That's the top one arm. And this is the scene part. So that's just a flunger. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When he's about. Oh, you should look on. Yeah. It was great. Absolutely, sure. And actually able to see your car. Yeah, that's actually something. It's all okay. So, and did you learn? I did. We had not at all. Yeah. And we also never towards the Esther. You're right. Your family is being really like that. Studying the talent, that was mine. Allows you to control with mine, allows you to what I appreciate them. I don't know what's going here. There is the area to still. So, yes, it's great. Hi, Andrew. It's like really good. Here's the I understand us. They would have to. I mean, we have our governor, I'm going to very let us go to the stores. You got a lot of oh, you got the last thing you say that I'm check in after the seconds. It's really like it's very early for 2 months. Thank you, good baby. Thanks to you, material. I also shut down that's Tuesday. Just trying to complete access. Yeah. Sign up. That's here. Because that's like I said, I mean, the first time. I started with Garbo, like 1970. And let's just say, that process, that it, that's how long I, so, which goes around a little different than that I should be. So, you, I'm so gonna say they're missing out. I'm sure I had to picture also, we're painted that starting if it's as you just like that's right. And I saw it. Yeah, I was thinking it comes straight. If this is really doing lots of stuff. Yeah, you don't even want to suck out the hair in that shock. Yeah, they're great. They're just sleeping. Everything is fine. Oh, okay. Sense it's bad. Christmas you say to us. I know. And I had the last face. Six years. Great out. It's my savings. What we do to us the transient is it's really making them becomes what you should see. He's it's outside the gross. And I've noticed because you need our guy that I feel the last I was running into manager. Very good. So but he's gonna start taking trying to save it because I was when I first decided yes trying to try to get I'm like no see I just stay And others were just their slips for the same. Captain to me, close, kind of getting strings. Yeah, angels and stuff for sure. Maybe I do it too much. Nice, sure. My sales do credit. Right. That's right. And there's not as much of it now. So that's bad enough. So, you know, it's like that's a full virus presence come. The house. You know, it's like that. Like, so that's the place. That was that. You're here at the end of the he's not nothing. Soldiers for nothing. So shut down house. He's still working out money. Yeah. So very cool. All the rest of the technology and you can not decide it's not like false therapy. So you know, it's pretty schools are great choices to that. All the works like looks so the brain is very good organization. You can just uh yeah. Yeah, something that you this music is and then so she knows the same notes and kind of yeah, I like to read it and you know, see where it's even concepts to it, it's show her. It's almost here's confusion for that thinking outbreaks. So now I can see it as to play the narrative because yeah, I'm not sure she got so as long as we got also nice there, she got an offer. What's the thing that's chasing? Passes. Well, that right. So I always do okay in our yeah, that's right. It's the question is, you know, one of like we are has for lawyers and it's around. And my hire was raised covering law. So later, fire is that apprentice is out of yeah, so it was when so it's more this year. It's just like yeah, it's kind of name right. And so they had a last stop. It's a lot or it's everyone's it's kind of very interesting. When you know, so there's it was like very exciting, you know, and you did kind of have she had a long activity with those things for the and you got down here. I don't know, you know, I am God. There, this guy's going to keep things coming. Maybe, you know, like, yeah, it's not the thought from it. Yeah, that looks good. Safety Ranch Hotel. Yeah, she is. You know, yeah, that's the around and we just go back walk. It's swing class. So we sure we'll be funny when it's swinging. Oh, we don't talk. This is that's yeah, so the first you don't have to worry about. I'm looking at share. It's the first one of the so so whatever this is, Google I gather to the like living environment games things. So I look at this game. Right, or moves the air, the last big also. Right, and then it also what's the same thing? Yeah, yeah. So it's like we're not sure we're going to just it's a feeling like that, but so I don't know. Yeah, you're right there. Right. And we can write well, I don't know, but can be able to stuff like this is like the theory. Oh, we can write this, which is sounds is but and the last So she's not fucking that's I'm going to say but don't worry don't know what to get people out of it. So pretty hard. This is hard. This is yeah, so the reason for that. Oh, been involved in a joke show, right? And then I think that was likely. And yeah, it's must that's not fair. Really. So that's what you get. So yeah. Speaking of the restaurant. So society has a lot of it's got a golden range in the payments. Like yeah, no, it's like oh, so it's not as in a transaction. Right. She's having yeah, so it's our hair trusting quite a while, aren't you? Just a joke. Look, something you'll see. You're still like everything. You know, not say that to our neighbor just do you want to make so it's a bit tricky built to this conversation. Sometimes it's that. Oh, no. So, that's what you're at. Yeah. Yeah. Choose it out. Actually, so healing is also awesome. Yeah. Just instant when you walk. Yeah. Yeah. So, yes, very good. Yes. I see that. Yes. You can't create these cells. Restaurants, I'm sure. It's like, these women involved in just so, forever now, so makes us massive and almost there. Yes, we really have since, first I seems just a fact. Anyone, thank you so much. All kinds of experiences, 2 hours. So, that's all. So, there are no options. So, yeah. And then, that's what I'm watching. Oh, what? Last oh, we are around and it's colors. It sounds in see. Sorry, my space. I was came to from wedding. I don't know. You were doing the track. I was just it was like sway, definitely it's not like my and it's like I was here's that down into the share. Eventually, literally just serious crazy. I can see you should. The morning it was like the message. No, it's actually, yeah, that's all. Those systems, what say is we stuck out. The circle is transmission. Right. I know what you mean. You're very stressed. Right. Right. And you don't lose. Really. What do you do that at the same time? Then you understand. And they don't test. Jim and how many did Jim things? Like breakers, in my this it's all water, space, and everything else. Can you yeah, turn up and down? Yes. Got it. The tendency to is that natural, the body is that's the front. We're doing this. Yeah, So, don't see, why, that's really a Japan, there, it's a part of right. If you're interested like that, should fly by. I said, hard to computer brain. So, we were shower. I ended up sitting down and it was on the river. So I opened the window and got the fans going. And that's Charles. I'm serious like yes, it's early speeches. Johnson's not sure if they had anything to do with it. It's just it's like up here in the south place where everything is fine. So Lexington Avenue line over to the air conditioning station. And you're just sitting in cottage. Yeah, so you were standing under this great the six it's empty green ones. Listen to the relationship. It's definitely cheap. Well, I'm actually going to ask this happening. I think yeah, everything that's what's right there. But that was good. Yeah, it's losing service. Yes. Oh, oh, pretty good. That's all. Well, but she says planes, but it's exciting because answers today. It's probably others not kind of like that. So, hopefully, it's really where now, if you're not, as a youngster, and it's the energy, so when I was it's pretty cool as didn't spend that I mean, I was taking front therapy and she says, need that way. And then the one we put on with the speakers or others were it's just a it's good to understand far right to from the first rounds of together right? I wanted to be and they liked it. She really revealing to me yes, it's yes, it's fine. It's in that field. Thanks. Just fine to see. Yeah, I need it. What to do? A girl from that is I'm trying to right, I never died if you see it. So and yeah, it is that girl and we tend to let me out of for it. But I think I raise the feeling of contract that feeling of the dark it's far was it was calm making it's not it's probably calm first I have it yeah yes I think I think I need to manage her.
Okay,
But I'll make.
okay. Hi. Oh, God. If everyone could please take their seats, that would be great. Uh, please take your seats. We're about to begin. She's on her way. Yeah. Please. You want to sit over to us? Sit down. Yeah. Get that out. Easy. Fine. Super good product. A little bigger than that. How's that? Good time. I knew you could try it. Right. Okay, please take your seats. We're about to start the program.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce my longtime friend Derek Reisfield, who's our speaker tonight. Derek and I met at Deerfield Academy about close to 50 years ago, which is hard to believe. We were on the same dormitory floor and in the same French class. And then we both lived in New York in the 90s. And on my last night, I think, before I moved back here in 2003, I went to Derek's apartment. And that was the same apartment that Greta Garbo lived in. And it's on 52nd Street and East End across from the River Club. And I went into this beautiful spot and Derek and I talked, and then he handed me something. And I look at it, and it was Greta Garbo's Oscar, which was pretty amazing, something you never forget. And so Greta, as I think most of us or all of us know, is Derek's great aunt, and he knew her extremely well. And tonight he's going to give us some nice stories and talk about her early years in Hollywood and more. And Derek has had, Greta Garbo had an amazing movie career. We all know that, but Derek has also had a very accomplished career. He co-founded MarketWatch, worked for McKinsey, and has many other achievements. So anyway, Derek, take it away.
All right, thank you. Thank you, David. I'm going to put this here and hopefully it will do a good job picking up my voice and hopefully you can hear me. I very much appreciate your welcome and your attendance, and David and the staff here have all been great. It's a real pleasure to be here. I find myself at an age where like the glasses don't quite work at this distance, so you'll have to excuse me. Printed it out in a large font, but I'll have to struggle a little bit to read it. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here today to talk about a person I care deeply about, my great aunt, Greta Garbo. Garbo was a remarkable woman. She was a legend and is an icon, and I hope this talk will provide you with some insights and understanding why. As the century of Garbo's birth approached in 2005, we were confronted with the question, why is Garbo important 100 years later? Relatively simple question. Surprisingly, no one had ever really formulated a satisfactory answer. I believe the answer is that Garbo is the first modern woman. To the world, Garbo is a conundrum, known by all, yet unknowable. She's forever enchanting, beautiful, alluring, yet mysterious and unapproachable. The well-trodden path is to say that Garbo's the greatest actress of all time, or one of. On the silver screen, Garbo creates her own magic. And she captivates and transports audiences even to this day. Add all this together, you have the Garbo legend. Then create some drama and excitement. Writers and documentary producers usually add, she wasn't all that smart. She was dour and boring. She was a recluse. All of these, in fact, are not the case. She didn't talk to the press. And until she decided she could trust someone, Garbo was guarded and non-committal. My family believes that the last substantive interview that Garbo gave to the press was in 1927. The mythology and all that surrounds her conceals the true Garbo. Just about everyone who knew her wouldn't talk. Those who did either deflected or had an agenda of their own. Almost all of her contemporaries were dead long before she was. The most important people that were key to her development as a professional and as a person exited the stage without speaking any lines. Maurice Stiller, the director who was her mentor, died prematurely in his 40s. Out of respect for her privacy, Charlie Chaplin, a great friend, did not mention her once in his autobiography. David Niven, another close friend, only tells one story about Garbo in his autobiography, but it's a story that was already publicized by his ex-wife. The Garbo legend has become exactly that, a legend. Facts were invented and repeated again and again. Assumptions became truths. Garbo was happy to be solitary, yet she was famously the hermit about town, with an active social life. No one could be as enchanting as Garbo. All the biographies I read and the documentaries I saw about my great aunt didn't ring true. They don't describe the person I knew. Often the author had a take on Garbo or a mission they were pursuing, regardless of what they were told or the facts. In several instances that I know or witnessed, they didn't want to change their angle of attack despite the facts or firsthand perspectives. One of the funniest and best debunkings of these myths came shortly after her death, when Michael Gross wrote an article in the New York Magazine. He chased down a number of stories about Garbo. One man had been quoted as saying Garbo had been staying in a Caribbean resort with her lesbian lover and he had spoken with them. When Gross asked how he knew they were a couple, the man said he just surmised they were sharing a room after all. In fact, the woman was my mother. They had a trip to the Caribbean each spring, and ever the practical Swedes, they would share a room. Another story was that Garbo was a raging alcoholic. Gross went to the liquor store at the end of our block in New York and quoted the proprietor as saying, if all his customers ordered like Garbo, he would be out of business. So Garbo suffers from a string of lousy biographies. For example, Robert Gottlieb, the august former editor of The New Yorker, produced an embarrassing book that literally is a rehash of inaccurate stories. He never bothered to ask anybody in the family for an interview. They all lack context and nuance. All the authors and directors seem to have missed their essence. Actually, one of the better ones is the Kevin Brownlow documentary, which was on Turner Classic Movies. They don't accurately depict Garbo and her true importance. They don't capture her significance as an actress who controlled her career in an era where the studio controlled everything, including sometimes to whom you were married. They don't convey the involvement that Garbo had in pushing boundaries of censorship throughout her career through the selection of material and fighting for inclusion of scenes that the censors wanted eliminated. They don't embrace her willingness to chart a path as a distinctly unique and independent individual in an era when that was not acceptable in general and for women in particular. They don't fully portray Garbo's impact on women's rights and the influence it had on society that provided a prominent example to many others. They don't really deal with the critical choices she made about marriage and children. While she did have a love of her life, tragically he died. While she had several romantic relationships, she chose not to marry. Either she said, no one will have me, I can't cook, or I don't think they would be happy being Mr. Garbo. Sadly, she faced a choice many women face, career or family, problem to this day. They don't celebrate her tolerance and acceptance of people with alternative lifestyles. She had many friends who were homosexuals or lesbians. She didn't care about that. She cared about your brains, your talent, and your achievement, the worth of your contribution. Finally, they don't really fully reflect Garbo's position as a cultural icon. In many ways, Garbo is the first modern woman, and they certainly don't appreciate her sense of humor and playfulness. So, a little bit of background. Garbo's success is really a combination of timing, talent, drive, and determination. She had all of these. Once she said to me, I would have been successful no matter what I chose to do. and I believe that to be profoundly true. But Garbo had luck in fortuitous timing. She managed to get accepted into the prestigious Royal Dramatic Theatre School in Stockholm and get a scholarship, which was incredibly rare. She managed to get casted by one of the two most important Swedish directors of her day, the imperious Marit Stiller, in the Swedish epic Gösta Berling's Saga. Stiller decided to take Garbo under his wing and mold her into a star. Best described as a combination of a Scarlet Letter crossed with Gone with the Wind, the 4-hour, 20-minute film was a blockbuster that swept Europe and established Garbo as a star. When their next project failed due to the financial collapse of the German production company, Garbo signed on to film Joyless Street, directed by George W. Pabst in Berlin. A seminal film which depicts the effects of grinding poverty experienced during the period of hyperinflation in Germany, the film was a powerful political statement. So much so that during the production of the film, the Nazis assassinated Hugo Bettauer, the author of the novel upon which it's based. Bettauer also wrote The City Without Jews, an apocalyptic tale of Vienna in which the entire Jewish population is exiled and the city descends into chaos. Not exactly the Nazi party of Hanukkah. At the same time, she agreed to star in Joyless Street. Garbo and Stiller both signed contracts with Louis B. Mayer to join the recently formed Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studio. They were following a number of talented Swedes, such as Victor Sjöström, the other great Swedish director of the time, and Lars Hansen, Garbo's male co-star in Gösta Berling, who had already gone to Hollywood to co-star with Lillian Gish in The Scarlet Letter. Like millions of others, Garbo and Stiller got on a boat and sailed to America. Garbo had caught the tail end of the first golden age of Swedish film and established herself as a major star. And while Garbo has starred in one of the most definitive German films of the era, the uncertain economic climate led them to try America. They sought opportunity, a quintessentially American story. When they signed with MGM, which had just been formed, it was on its way to becoming the leading Hollywood studio and the epitome of glamour. It was the perfect home for Garbo, and both she and the studio made the most of it. Garbo was the most glamorous and unattainable star. MGM ran a factory focused on manufacturing glamour every day, distributing it to millions around the globe without parallel. Garbo made 26 films with MGM over the course of 16 years. She was the top box office draw for most of her career, and for several years was the highest paid individual in America. Many of her films push at the boundaries of censorship and chart new territory in that restrictive time. For example, the Hays office initially rejected the script for Camille. After all, it was about a courtesan. The studio countered, it's a Dumas novel and a play, no dice. But it was Verdi's La Traviata. Sorry. When they said it was Garbo production, MGM finally got the okay. Garbo was able to do things nobody else was allowed to do. Each new film was a sensation and a huge success. Of course, in Camille, Garbo dies in the end, which is basically a requirement for any morally suspect character at the time. And it gave Garbo a humorous line. You have to be in really good shape, die on screen. It takes effort. She landed at MGM just at the golden age of the Hollywood studio. MGM and Garbo would dominate the globe. They would quickly solidify their position. It also was a period of American preeminence, economic and cultural ascendancy. The post-World War roaring 20s, Hollywood would become one of the first truly global industries, and Garbo was the flagship. Garbo caught the crest of the wave. The new medium of film helped usher it all in and is a key part of the modern era. It's the case of being on the right street corner at the right time when the right bus comes along and having exact change in your pocket. In many ways, Garbo is the first modern woman. There's a rapid transformation, and the definition of Garbo's image was formed during those first 3 films at MGM. And one needs to give credit here to the remarkable Ruth Harriet Louise, who was the chief portrait studio photographer at MGM. Louise was instrumental in crafting and developing Garbo's image. And there's ample evidence, that Garbo participated in this process as well. And thanks to Dwight Cleveland, I have a great illustration of it. So this is a lobby card for Garbo's second film called The Temptress. And you can see this image of Garbo here. It's like pretty vampy, right? And several years ago, I saw a Ruth Harriet Louise photo come up on the market, and Garbo had written a note to Louise on that photo. And the note said, "Louise, I hate this photo. Can't we do something different?" So Garbo was the first woman to be depicted as both feminine and confident at the same time. Unlike Mary Pickford with the pigtails and the gingham dress, and unlike Theda Bara with the jewelry and the snakes. So this is a revolution. One must remember that women had just won the right to vote. The era of flappers had arrived. Women's position in society was changing very rapidly, and what was acceptable for them was undergoing a sea change. The US was rapidly urbanizing, and women were going to work in cities and earning salaries and living on their own. They were becoming more independent and self-reliant. Garbo was the first female star to represent this on screen and in her studio photography. Garbo continually pushed those boundaries in each film, and the studio photography also reflected this. Garbo lived through this change for women and represented it to the public, not only in her films, but in her private life. Garbo worked. She was extraordinarily successful. She was independent. She controlled her destiny. These were radical departures. Ironically, during her contract dispute with MGM, and I'm going to talk about that because it's very important and tells you what you need to know about Garbo. But one of the points the studio cited for her unreasonableness was Garbo's demand that she get paid what male stars were getting paid. She arguably was the first person to publicly fight for equal pay for equal work. Moreover, I know this is something she was passionate about at an early age. Her family nickname was Kata, which refers to Kata Dahlström, the leading Swedish suffragette. Garbo was one of the first actresses to employ elements of method acting on screen. Her ability to convey emotion in a close-up without stage-like theatrics was a critical breakthrough. In her autobiography, Lillian Gish recounts seeing Garbo the first time on film, on the screen, and realizing that From that day forward, every actress, including herself, would be measured against Garbo. Bette Davis called Garbo's acting witchcraft on the screen. Within 18 months of her arrival, Garbo and her productions were firmly established as the preeminent product of MGM. Those images on the screen and the global marketing machine that developed to drive people into the cinema the world over, especially the studio portrait images, are inexorably implanted in our culture. You see a picture of Garbo almost 100 years later, and it's still relevant and modern. Many of those images are timeless. But Garbo is more than the images and the emotions they convey. There's a reference to her each week in print somewhere in the New York Times, arguably the compendium of our culture. She's become a point on the cultural compass by which others are measured. Marilyn Monroe is an icon, but a one-dimensional one. Garbo's influence is much more subtle and profound, and I would argue it's more pervasive. Why? Garbo's about more than just sex. Journalists or the PR agents often refer to new critically acclaimed actresses as the next Greta Garbo. No one wants to be the next Marilyn Monroe. Garbo went out on top, retiring at the age of 36, never to return to the screen. Thus, she did not age in the public's mind and remained an indelible image of black and white. A world that is familiar yet distant. It's an elegant, glamorous world because that was the depiction that MGM wanted to deliver. MGM had the financial resources and an army of craftsmen to draw upon. More importantly, the stability and process of the studio system allowed the talent to hone their craft. And I'm not just talking about the actresses and actors, it's everybody in the production, and they were able to deliver a superior product to the screen. Many of the production crew worked on all or the vast majority of her films, such as the cameraman Bill Daniels. He probably did, I don't know, half or more of her films. MGM also had Irving Thalberg, the head of production. Garbo termed him a genius, not a term she used lightly. The only other person I ever heard her call a genius was Charlie Chaplin. Thalberg produced 10 of Garbo's films. Thalberg's death in 1936 marked the apogee of MGM, and the studio was never quite the same. The other notable producer was David O. Selznick, who went on to produce Gone with the Wind and was Louis B. Mayer's son-in-law. When he announced that he was leaving MGM, Garbo begged him to stay. On the screen, Garbo has an unusual connection with her audience. For men and women, it was both a special experience. There's an emotional involvement that she is consistently able to generate out of the thinnest material. As Kenneth Tynan famously said, when one sees what one sees in other women drunk, one sees in Garbo sober. That's why the theater goers bought so many tickets, and she has ardent fans to this day. She also appealed equally to men and women. There's also an integrity that Garbo has that's exceptional. Garbo is Garbo. Underneath it all, several layers down, it isn't an act. She is who she is. She makes no compromises, either professionally or personally. She refused to succumb to Hollywood. Hollywood changes people, not Garbo. The Garbo who arrived in 1925 at 19 years old, what is the Garbo who left 16 years later? She did not fall victim to Hollywood's many seductive pitfalls, and does sadly it seems almost everybody else. So I want to talk about Garbo's strike, because this really is the essence of her personality and shows you her determination and drive. So the story of Garbo's contract dispute with MGM at the outset of her career is the most important part of the story. It tells you basically everything you need to know. Garbo's original contract with MGM was for 3 years. Almost everybody else signed a 5-year or 7-year deal. Garbo was different from the start. She negotiated a shorter commitment. She wanted better roles that had been promised to her by Louis B. Mayer when she signed, not the vamp roles she was being given. Mayer refused to honor that commitment unless Garbo signed a new, longer contract. In fact, MGM had been trying to get Garbo to sign a longer term deal since before her arrival in America. Garbo said she would sign a longer term deal, but only if she got paid more. Specifically, what her on and off screen lover, John Gilbert, was being paid. Louis Mayer told her in no uncertain terms things didn't work that way. Mayer reportedly told one of his colleagues, what she needs is a good spanking. By the beginning of 1927, Garbo had starred in 3 MGM productions, The Torrent, The Temptress, and Flesh and the Devil. The first 2 films had been successfully released. The third was about to premiere, and it basically became the Titanic of its day. Then MGM told her the 4th film that the studio wanted her to do would be another vamp role in a production titled Women Love Diamonds. Garbo objected and was told she had no choice. That's when she uttered the famous line to Louis B. Mayer, I think I go. MGM didn't know if she meant back to her hotel or to Sweden. She called in sick and refused to report to work. She went on strike. 3 days later, she went to the premiere of Flesh and the Devil with John Gilbert. As far as I know, that's the only premiere she ever went to. She was dancing under Louis B. Mayer's nose. MGM pulled out all the stops to coerce her into backing down. They threatened her with deportation. They spread negative stories about her in the press. They tried to turn her friends against her. Louis B. Mayer even offered one friend, Lars Saxon, the rights to distribute MGM films in Scandinavia if he could get Garbo to sign the contract. Saxon refused, saying if Garbo didn't want to do it, he couldn't change her mind. After a couple of months, MGM decided on a new tactic. We'll put Garbo in a serious dramatic role, Anna Karenina. However, it was a production designed to fail. You have a lousy co-star, a lousy director, good luck, everything's going to be second rate. If it doesn't end your career, it will damage it. Garbo called the studio's bluff. She reported to the set, and filming began. This went on for a couple of weeks. When the production was about 1/3 complete, MGM and Garbo agreed to a new contract. They scrapped all the footage they had shot and rebooted Anna Karenina with John Gilbert as her co-star and Edmund Golding as the director and producer. Garbo didn't get everything she wanted, but she got a tenfold increase in salary, with more to come later. She got approval over a number of things, such as scripts, co-stars, directors, and a host of other conditions she insisted upon, such as a limit of 2 pictures per year and pay whether the studio used her or not. Many of these rights were unprecedented and had the effect of solidifying her power and position at MGM. A key issue for Garbo was control of her image. One of the things she did with the new contract was to take control of it. Garbo had to approve every image that MGM sent out. Garbo had the right to kill any picture she didn't like, no more photo sessions with Leo the lion, things that she found humiliating in part because they had nothing to do with her work on films. She was only obligated to report for one studio portrait session per film. It later became one every other film. She essentially could choose her own photographer. When the studio replaced Clarence Sinclair Bull with George Hurrell, after one film, Bull was back to shoot photos of Garbo by special arrangement at her insistence. Hurrell may have been a better portrait photographer for the star who prompted the change, Norma Shearer, the wife of MGM production chief Irving Thalberg. However, in my opinion, while the difference is subtle, the Bull photos are better, and Garbo knew what she was doing. At the end of these negotiations, Garbo used the services of the first Hollywood agent, Harry Eddington. He was married to her Flesh and the Devil cast mate, Barbara Kent. Typical for Garbo, she did not pay Eddington a fee. He did it for free, believing if he helped Garbo, other clients would follow, and they did. She chose the right moment to pick her battle. Flesh and the Devil was a blockbuster. Garbo was too important to MGM. Despite her short tenure, Garbo films represented, get this, 1/8 of MGM's revenue, 50% of which came from foreign markets, compared with roughly 1/3 for other films. Garbo was key to MGM's domestic business, but it was the foundation of MGM's global distribution. MGM needed Garbo more. So Garbo largely won. So what makes this story so remarkable? Garbo was 21. She was a foreigner. She was not a native English speaker. She was a woman. And she was dealing with one of Hollywood's, and this is his grandson Daniel Selznick's term, toughest son of a bitches around, Louis B. Mayer. So I'll start to wrap up. When her Holly career ended, it wasn't planned. The war, World War II, cut off access to the foreign market and the revenue of her films that accounted for half. Ironically, her last film, I always thought it lost money, Two-Faced Woman. It actually made money, but it was very controversial. And it was a comedy released the week after Pearl Harbor. And there were a lot of moral issues and objections from conservative groups, and they redid some of the film and changed essentially the story and just creamed it. The whole controversy took a heavy toll on her. Her strategy was to sit out the war and come back when it was over. She let MGM out of a second picture in her contract and said, I'll come back when the war's over. She tried to make additional films for several years, but the world changed and the studio system was in decline. And the whole sort of underpinnings of how the studio system worked and the audience changed radically after the war with suburbanization and, the baby boom, so women weren't working as much, and television coming along. Hollywood sort of got creamed and the world changed on it. The film project she spent the longest time pursuing was Balzac's La Duchesse de Langeais, The Wicked Duchess. The producer, Walter Wanger, couldn't put a deal together, and the financing problems, surprise, surprise, were driven in part by censorship issues. They couldn't get a script approved. so they couldn't get financing. And the story is The Wicked Duchess, so you can imagine. So Garbo wouldn't sell out and compromise. If she were going to do a film, it would be on her terms. No supporting roles, something of substance. She famously said, no murderers, no mamas. When Billy Wilder approached her to play Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, Garbo recommended he get Gloria Swanson. Garbo was finally done. From that point, she never looked back. So, how did Garbo feel about all of this? She was tremendously proud of her career. She achieved what she set out to do professionally, which was to be the leading actress of her day, largely in control of her career, and to star in films that were significant and groundbreaking. But she was frustrated by the factory system of Hollywood production, and with the death of Irving Thalberg and the departure of Selznick, she felt the artistic temperament of MGM was gone. 5 of her films were based on writings of Nobel Prize winners: Lagerlof, Ibanez, Pirandello, and O'Neill. One was by an author who was killed by the Nazis. Several others came from groundbreaking novels such as The Green Hat, The Painted Veil, Susan Lennox, Horizon Fall, and of course, Anna Karenina twice. And of course, her personal favorite, Camille by Alexander Dumas. She was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. She never attended the awards dinner, and she never got an Oscar. In 1954, the Academy made up for this oversight and awarded her an honorary Academy Award for unforgettable screen performances. Garbo's impact goes beyond film. The professional and personal examples she set provided examples for others. Boundaries she pushed were followed by others. Paths she charted helped others at the same time who took initiative and pushed forward, but Garbo's actions were constantly publicized. The difference is that Garbo's achievements are coupled with her images. And these images of the modern woman were the first of their kind to be projected and displayed throughout the world by the new medium of film, all promoted by the massive, disciplined marketing machine the studio created to support it. These images appeared in countless magazines, newspapers, and on countless billboards. Garbo's studio portraits are just as important as her films. In a way, everything after those early Garbo images of the modern woman is derivative. One sees visual references to her imagery all the time. Garbo's status as an icon is based on the fact that she was first. The other thing you should know about Garbo is that the person who arrived there in 25 is the person who left. Hollywood changes people and not for the better. She left with her integrity intact. I think those two things are what sets her apart. Thank you.
I hope someone or many people have questions for Derek. I also wanted to point out he has given this book to the club. It's called Garbo, and it was written by your
My brother and Robert Dance, who's a Hollywood portrait photography expert.
perfect.
And
Yeah,
the images, these all come from her personal collection of photographs. I mentioned that MGM had to show her the photos and she had approval rights. So she kept those photos. And that's what's in the book.
thank you so much. We appreciate it. And yes, please ask Derek some questions.
Okay, so she retired at about 36.
Yes.
What did she do for the rest of her life? Or what was her passion after she retired?
Good question. So she, I don't think, and we have some records where, she sort of sat out the war At the end of the war, she was pursuing a project which was about a Norwegian woman who becomes the captain of a ship and is, smuggling stuff to counter the Nazis. And all of a sudden, it ended up in all these lawsuits. And she wasn't really participating in the lawsuits, but she was, going to get targeted. So she's like, I'm out of here. And then other things were offered to her. Um, she spent the most time with Walter Wanger trying to do La Duchesse de Langeais, and that ended really in about 49. And at that point, she was sort of done. She had moved on. So one of the things that's unusual about Garbo for being a Hollywood actress is she was able to walk away. So you have people like Joan Crawford who, you know, had to be front and center, had to, be the star and be in, the next project, and also needed to financially, or Katharine Hepburn, who didn't need it financially, but just couldn't walk away. Katharine Hepburn spent like 2 years in Australia doing Shakespeare, but she couldn't get a film room. She had to be on stage and perform. And Garbo didn't need that. So she had a life and was doing stuff, and she was busy. She traveled a lot. She had friends all over. She collected art and furniture. So she had a great art collection, and she made a bunch of very interesting choices. She sort of moved from impressionism to expressionism and some modern paintings. Um, and you know, she would be traveling, and she had this regular schedule. She would be, summer in Europe on a boat in the mountains. She'd then go to California in the fall, and she'd be back in New York, and then down to the Caribbean at Christmas, and then back to California, and then out, so and she had friends that she would stay with. So she was pretty busy, and she read a lot. She did like TV. She loved Benny Hill. Thought he was amazing. So she just moved on, and she didn't need the whole Hollywood thing.
How old was she in this photo, do you know?
This photo,
Yeah.
she's probably about 22, 23. Yeah.
The photographer.
Dwight,
What happened to her
jewelry. So my mother ended up with it.
Oh,
So, and I have some, now that my mother unfortunately is deceased, I have some pieces, and she was, it's probably best known for the Vidura bracelet, and she knew Folco di Vidura. So she had this watch and bracelet, chain link, very heavy gold, and she was very, the choices she made, she liked relatively modern stuff. Um, so she didn't have that much jewelry, but she did have a lot of Fedora stuff.
To put it into context, give a little bit about where she was born, her siblings, where she came from. Did she have a background of money? Did she not?
So-
How did this person just suddenly?
Well, so she was born in Stockholm, 1905. She had two older siblings, my grandfather and a sister named Alva, who tragically died in her 20s. And her father worked for the city of Stockholm. He was a gardener, in like Park and Recs. And he got kidney disease and died when she was about 14. So they were, and her mother worked as a secretary. and also would take in sewing and things like that. So it was hard scrabble. I wouldn't say it was like abject poverty, but it was sort of a lower middle class existence, and they had an apartment in Stockholm. And she, when her father died, she had to go to work, and she ended up, and this is interesting, she ended up going to work in a department store called Pub, Paul U. Bergstrom, uh, commonly known as Pub, and it's still in existence on Cotton's in Stockholm. I lived in Stockholm for about 3.5 years. And so it's still there. And she ended up in the millinery department. And she quickly became literally the best salesperson. And at a later juncture, when she wanted to leave to do a film, early film, Bergstrom said, I can't let her go. She's my best salesperson. So, and in that process, she was very interested in theater, and they would do short films, advertising films for the department store. So she got cast in that, and she was a model in the, catalog. And somehow, we really don't know how, she got to the former head of the Royal Dramatic Theatre School and got him to tutor her and give her acting lessons. And then she applied to the Royal Dramatic Theatre School and she got a scholarship. And they gave out like maybe 1 or 2 scholarships a year out of 20, 30 kids. And that was a serious program. It was 2 years, and you were in productions, and she was in quite a few productions in the theater, and she got bigger and bigger roles. And then at the end of her second year, she got selected to go back for a third year called Premier Elect, first student, and it was Garbo and a guy named Alf Scherber, who was Ingmar Bergman's mentor. And so she came back for a third year in this special position and was going to star in bigger and bigger roles. And that's when Maurice Stiller was looking to film Josta Björling's saga and needed to cast the leading female, Countess Dona. And he, went to the Royal Academy and he selected Garbo. And that sort of changed history, if you will. And there was this period in Swedish film, which I refer to as the first golden age. And what happened was during World War I, the German film industry had been sort of dominant, but then they couldn't produce, and the French couldn't produce. So the Swedes were actually free to sort of make films and get it distributed and make money. And they, had Stiller and Victor Sjöström. And so they produced all these films, and Stiller had gotten the rights to Josta Björling. I think I said, it's a cross between Scarlet Letter and Gone with the Wind. It's a book that you cannot finish high school in Sweden without reading this book. Lagerlof is like the classic Swedish novelist of the turn of the century and wrote several books that are, mainstream part of Swedish culture. And she won the Nobel Prize, so it was a big deal. And the film went all over. And it's problematic because the original version, was 4 hours and 20 minutes, and that doesn't exist. No one's been able to put it together. I think I saw a 3-hour version at MoMA years ago. They keep trying to find stuff, but when Sweden sort of topped out after, this is 10 years almost, well, 6, 7 years after World War I is over, so the Germans are back. Stiller goes down and has a deal with this film company called Trianon in Berlin, run by a guy with a total fraud. And they're going to film this film. Garbo's going to be the star, called The Odalisque from Smyrna, which is about a Russian countess who flees Russia when the Soviets take over, and she ends up in Constantinople. And I can't even remember what the story. It's a convoluted story. So they go down. The Swedish film crew goes down. They're backed by the Germans. They arrive in Constantinople, and all of a sudden, the Germans are bankrupt. There's no money. They're literally stuck in Constantinople and can't pay the bills. And eventually, they get somebody in the Swedish embassy to get somebody in Sweden to wire money so they can get back. And they go to Berlin, and literally within 3, 4 days, they sign a contract with Pabst to do Joyless Street and MGM. And they're going to go to America because Sjöström had gone and Lars Hansen had gone, and Louis B. Mayer came to Berlin. He had a big problem in the formation of MGM, which was, I'm trying to remember the film. I can't remember the film, but it was, there was this film, and it's about Roman history, and there are chariot races and all sort of stuff. And it's way over budget, and they're filming it in Italy, and Mayer comes over to straighten it all out. Fires the director, reboots it. Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur. It's Ben-Hur. I'm betting you knew. I just didn't ask. And so, and they're forming MGM, and they're like, you have all these talented people who've been in film, and he needs talent. So he's recruiting people, and he signs Garbo and Stiller. Now, they show up, and they show up in New York, they hang out in New York. There are lots of reasons why they were in New York for several months, and part of it was they didn't want to start the contract. The East Coast office wanted the West Coast office to pay for everything. The West Coast office wanted the East Coast, and finally they get to Hollywood, and she starts doing films. So she had run through most of her contract by the time she gets to Flesh and the Devil. So she's this rocket that they had, and the contract's going to run out, and they don't have a deal. That's why they kept on wanting to extend it. And they knew, there's lots of stories that Louis B. Mayer wanted Stiller, and he took Garbo because Stiller insisted. But there's a lot of evidence that Louis B. Mayer wanted Garbo, and because they had seen rushes of the films, and he wanted her. And so, they knew they had something special when she came. And later the story was, well, she was a nothing, MGM made her, and, we can just drop her and move on. But she, and Stiller, and this is an interesting, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie The Artist, but that's about her relationship with John Gilbert. So Gilbert was this, major artist, actor, leading actor, and, sound just killed him. And Stiller, this incredible, brilliant director, but he did things his own way, and he wasn't going to do it the way the studio did things. It was not a production, it was art. And Stiller didn't survive. So he was gone after one film. He got fired and went over to Paramount, and then went back to Sweden, and he died. And at the same time, Garbo's sister, Alva, died as well. And MGM wouldn't let her go back to Sweden.
Happens. She was so young when all of this is happening and she's going around the world. And I'm sure most of the people she worked with, even her co-stars who were a lot older,
Yeah,
was she alone during all of this, or did her mother
She
stay
was-
with her, or was she really out there doing this by herself?
she was
Which to
on
me
her
sounds
own.
frightening.
She was on her own, so she went with Stiller. And, and then Stiller was gone. After about 18 months, he was gone. So she really was on her own. She was very unhappy in Hollywood. It was a factory.
Okay, so first of all, who was the love of her life?
Is it John Elder?
And that's first of all. Second of all, was she friendly, great friends with like Ingrid Bergman or any of these other? She's Swedish, right?
She's
Yeah,
Swedish.
so
I mean,
are there different ages?
They're different ages. She knew Ingrid Bergman, but they weren't close friends.
Was she friends with any big star that was like her bosom buddy friend?
Well, Big Chaplin.
Yeah.
I mean-
Who's the love of her life? Let's get there.
Say it's Marie Stiller,
Okay.
right? And then he died. She was about 42 and he died, and that was it. And then, she did have a romantic relationship with Gilbert, but I don't think she thought that. I think she would put it that, he wanted the actress Greta Garbo, not me. And I think she viewed him as unstable. And, and he wanted to marry her and she said no. And the story, you probably heard the story that, she left him high and dry at the altar. We don't think that's the case. That he wanted to, King Vidor was getting married to Eleanor Boardman. And, there was a big party and I think he wanted to, let's do a double wedding. Like, no. And so she, walked out, but she said, I never agreed to marry him. So, yeah.
What, I mean, you know so much. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about her intimately, like your relationship with her and what you are truly fond of about her, like your memories? Because, I mean, this is really insightful, but you knew the truth.
Well, I would say that the film that captures her personality is Ninochka.
Okay.
She was a great mimic. She was very playful with words. She loved language. She was very perceptive about people. I remember we had a dinner at my parents', and she was there, and there were some other people, and there was a couple who were good friends. She knew them, my parents knew them. They walk out, and I remember her saying, that marriage isn't gonna last. Right? And we're all like, what are you talking about? He's like, not gonna last. And they'd been married, they had like a 8-year-old kid, and sure enough, like 5 years later, they got divorced. So she was very perceptive about people and she liked to perform. If she wanted to perform, you could not meet anybody more charming, but she had to want to do it. And she didn't like the intrusion in her life. And so she, she went to parties, she, did stuff, but she just didn't want the press and photos and all this stuff. You've been patient.
Sort of piggybacking that's, I was just gonna ask for a personal story that you might have
Well, I
of
mean,
your time with her.
yeah, I mean, I remember her, she was actually fairly athletic. So I remember playing tennis with her a lot, and she was pretty good. And I wasn't. And she, so she, and she would be like, you're not throwing the ball high enough on your serve. You need to throw it high. So she, and I would say one of the things that she was really positive on was education. And she always regretted that she never really got a formal education, although, the Royal Dramatic Theatre School was pretty good. But she really admired people who had an education, and thought that was very important. And I'll tell you a funny story, which, and this cuts against this myth of, Garbo the recluse. So, she, she, she had been on a yacht, Cecile de Rothschild yacht in the Mediterranean, and there was this guy, Len Billings, who was on the yacht for a period of time, and they, not that many people on the boat, and they're running around the Mediterranean, and she, they got to know each other, and turns out Len Billings was John F. Kennedy's best friend. They had been roommates at Choate. So he comes back to Washington, and he basically, Len Billings had the relationship, he basically had his own bedroom at the White House. So he was there constantly. And he's like, I, was on this boat, and he met Garbo, and she's fantastic, and blah, 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 all this stuff. So through an intermediary, they invited my great aunt to come down for dinner at the White House. And it was actually, I forget her name, she was the director of the National Institute of Health. So she was part of it, and somehow my great aunt knew her. And so Garbo shows up for this dinner, and it's this woman, her husband, Len Billings, John Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy. And they have this dinner, and they start out with cocktails, and, Len Billings is like, so great to see you. And my great aunt's like, who are you? And so they had arranged that she would just like not recognize him, deny the whole story. They get like 2/3 of the way through dinner, and then they press playing a joke. And so that's how they got her to come to the White House, was to play a practical joke. And then we had her diary. So she stayed at the Hay Adams Hotel. And then she goes the following day up to the Capitol to have lunch with Senator Frank Keating from New York. And then she flew back. So like hardly the life of a recluse. And so all these stories you hear about her were just made up and repeated, and it's very frustrating. And so you're not quite sure what to believe.
Do you want to set the record